My daughter-in-law hid cameras in my bedroom, but the real mistake was coming back at 11:43 that night to search for the deed to my house. I was standing in the dark hallway when I saw her through the narrow crack of my office door, kneeling in front of my file cabinet like a thief who had practiced the motion in her mind 100 times before. Madison's blonde hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, her cream sweater spotless, her wedding ring flashing every time her hand moved under the desk lamp. She looked nothing like a criminal. She looked like the woman who brought me chicken soup after my husband Harold died, the woman who called me mom in front of guests, the woman who told my son Daniel that she was only trying to help me stay safe. But safe people do not sneak into a widow's house close to midnight. Safe people do not use the spare key hidden beneath the planter on the porch. And safe people do not pull open another woman's private drawers while whispering to themselves, "Where is it, Eleanor? Where did you put it?" I held my phone in my right hand, the screen dimmed, the camera recording silently. My left hand was pressed against the wall because I needed something solid beneath my palm. Not because I was afraid of Madison. I had already spent most of that evening being afraid. And fear has a way of burning itself out when the truth becomes clear enough. What I felt then was colder than fear. It was understanding. 3 hours earlier I had found the first camera. It was inside the little digital clock Madison had given me 2 weeks before, the one she said would help me sleep better because the numbers were large enough for tired eyes. I had placed it on my dresser without thinking much of it. At 68 you learn to accept small gifts politely, even when they come wrapped in pity. But that night, while changing the pillowcases in the room where Harold and I had slept for 34 years, I noticed the clock was angled wrong. Not toward the bed as a clock should be, but toward my closet and the old cedar chest where I kept personal papers, letters, photographs, and memories that did not belong to anyone else. Picked it up, and saw the tiny black dot hidden behind the plastic face. For a few seconds I simply stood there with the clock in my hand. I did not scream. I did not call Daniel. I did not throw it across the room. I placed it on a folded towel on my nightstand, looked at the framed picture of Harold beside it, and whispered, "She's watching me." The words felt unreal in my own mouth. My daughter-in-law was not watching over me. She was watching me. After that, every strange moment from the past month lined up in my mind like cans on a grocery shelf. Madison asking where Harold kept important documents. Madison suggesting that large houses were too much for women my age. Madison telling Daniel I had forgotten conversations that had never happened. Madison smiling at me across Sunday dinner while studying me the way a realtor studies a property before listing it. So I did what women of my generation were trained to do long before anyone respected us for it. I stayed calm. I made tea. I pretended to go upstairs. Then I turned off every light except the small lamp in Harold's office and waited behind the hallway wall with my phone ready. Now here she was, exactly where I knew she would be, sliding my files out one by one, her polished nails tapping against folders labeled insurance, taxes, medical, utilities. Then she found the brown envelope I had left in the top drawer, the one marked house deed in my careful handwriting. Madison froze. Even from the hallway, I could see her shoulders rise with relief. She opened it quickly, almost greedily, and pulled out the paper inside. But it was not the deed. The real deed had not been in this house for years. Harold had seen to that before he passed because my husband, quiet as he was, understood people better than I ever gave him credit for. Madison read the page once. Then again. Her face changed so fast it was almost sad to watch. The paper in her hand said only one thing. "This is not the deed. This is proof that you came looking for it." I stepped into the doorway then and turned on the overhead light. Madison spun around, pale and breathless, clutching the envelope against her chest like it belonged to her. I looked at her for a long moment, the way a mother looks at a child who has finally broken something that cannot be repaired. Then I said very quietly, "Were you searching for something, Madison?" Madison's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. For once, the woman who always had an answer, always had a softer explanation ready, stood in my husband's old office with nothing but silence between us. The lamp on Harold's desk made the room look warmer than it felt. His leather chair was still tucked beneath the desk the way he liked it. His reading glasses were still in the top drawer. The brass clock he bought at a flea market in Kentucky still ticked with that steady little sound he used to say reminded him that time only scares people who waste it. Madison lowered the envelope slowly, trying to fold her face back into something innocent. "Eleanor," she whispered, "you scared me." I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was so carefully chosen. She wanted the first injury to belong to her. She wanted to be the startled one, the concerned one, the daughter-in-law caught in an awkward misunderstanding. I had watched her do that to Daniel for years. She could take a room full of facts and rearrange them until she was standing in the middle like the only reasonable person there. I stepped farther into the office and kept my phone at my side, still recording. "You used the spare key," I said. "It is almost midnight." She blinked twice fast. "I was worried about you. Daniel said you sounded confused earlier." That was the first lie of the night, but it was not the first lie she had told about me. 3 weeks earlier, she had begun arriving at my house more often than usual, each visit wrapped in kindness so polished it reflected only what she wanted people to see. The first time, she came on a Tuesday afternoon with a glass container of homemade chicken noodle soup and a paper bag from the pharmacy. She kissed my cheek in the entryway and said, "I know you forget to eat when you are alone, Mom." I remember the way Daniel smiled behind her, grateful and tired, as if Madison had just solved a problem he did not know how to face. I wanted to tell him I had eaten lunch that day, a turkey sandwich with pickles and iced tea, sitting at the kitchen table where he used to do homework. But the words felt too small to defend myself with, so I simply thanked her and put the soup in the refrigerator. Then came the vitamins, the large print calendar, the fall prevention pamphlet from a senior care center I had never asked about. Madison left them on my counter as if they were flowers. "There is no shame in planning ahead," she said, smoothing the pamphlet with her palm. "This house has so many stairs. Daniel worries." Daniel did not look like he had worried until she said it. That was one of her talents. She could plant a feeling in him and make him believe it had always been there. I had known my son since he weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces, since his fists curled around my finger in a hospital room in Columbus while Harold cried harder than I did. Daniel was not cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruelty would have given me something solid to push against. Daniel was soft in the places Madison was sharp. He avoided discomfort. He believed whichever voice sounded most certain. And Madison always sounded certain. During that first week, she started asking harmless questions while opening cabinets she had no reason to open. "Where do you keep your insurance papers now?" she asked while reaching for coffee mugs. "Did Harold ever update the title on the house?" she asked while wiping a counter that was already clean. "Do you still remember the combination to the fire safe, or did Daniel write it down somewhere?" she asked with a small laugh, as though memory itself were a family joke. I answered little and watched much. The house watched with me. Every room seemed to hold Harold's absence in a different shape. In the kitchen, it was the empty hook where his baseball cap used to hang. In the hallway, it was the quiet space beside the umbrella stand where he kept his boots. In our bedroom, it was the left side of the bed that still looked too neat because I could not bring myself to sleep there. Madison saw those quiet places and mistook them for weakness. She mistook grief for confusion. She mistook loneliness for surrender. One Sunday after dinner, she stood in my living room and looked around as if measuring the walls with her eyes. "A place this size must be exhausting," she said. "A condo would give you freedom." I folded the napkin slowly. "Freedom from what?" She laughed light and bright. "From all this responsibility." Daniel nodded from the couch, not looking up from his phone. "Madison just means you should not have to handle everything alone." I looked at my son, then really looked at him. He had Harold's jaw in my eyes, but something in his expression had changed since his marriage. He no longer asked what I wanted. He waited for Madison to explain what I needed. That was when the first cold thread of suspicion moved through me. Not panic. Not yet. Just a quiet pull. The kind you feel when a drawer has been opened and closed by someone who does not know exactly how you leave it. The next morning I found the first drawer out of place. It was not obvious. Madison was too careful for obvious things. The handle was not hanging open, the folders were not scattered, and nothing looked missing at first glance. But Harold had taught me that a person's habits leave signatures. Mine were small. The blue folder always sat behind the green one. The rubber band around the tax receipts always faced left. The little brass paperweight shaped like a cardinal always rested on the right corner of the desk, angled toward the window because Harold said birds should face the light. That morning the cardinal faced the wall. I stood in the doorway of the office with my coffee cooling in my hand, and something in me went still. I did not touch anything for almost a full minute. I only looked. Then I set the cup down on a coaster, opened the drawer with 2 fingers, and saw that the folders had been shifted. Not enough for a stranger to notice. Enough for a wife who had lived in that house for 34 years. Insurance was in front of utilities. Medical records had been moved behind bank statements. The envelope with Harold's old letters had been placed upside down. I closed the drawer gently and walked to the kitchen as if the floor might remember my steps. Sunlight was coming through the curtains in thin yellow stripes. The refrigerator hummed. The wall clock ticked above the stove. Everything sounded normal, which somehow made it worse. A house can look peaceful while someone is slowly taking it away from you. That was when I took out a small blue notebook from the junk drawer and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Under it I wrote, "Office drawer moved. Cardinal turned. Files shifted." I did not know yet what I was building, but I knew better than to trust memory when someone was trying to make memory the accusation. Over the next few days I wrote everything down. Tuesday, Madison asked whether I had ever misplaced important mail. Wednesday, Daniel called to remind me about a doctor's appointment I had never forgotten. Thursday, Madison mentioned that I had repeated myself at dinner, though I knew I had not. She said it gently, almost sadly, in front of my son. "Eleanor, you already told us that story twice," she said, placing her hand over mine as if comforting me. I looked at her fingers resting on my skin and felt the performance in the touch. Daniel's face changed right away. Concern settled over him like a shadow. "Mom, are you sleeping enough?" he asked. I wanted to say, "I have slept alone since your father died," and still I know what I say. I wanted to say, "Your wife is teaching you to doubt me one sentence at a time." Instead I smiled and said, "Maybe I am tired." Madison squeezed my hand. "That is why we worry." We. Such a small word. Such a useful little cage. By the end of that week, she had turned every ordinary part of my life into evidence against me. If I left a coffee mug in the sink, I was overwhelmed. If I asked Daniel to repeat something because the dishwasher was running, I was losing track. If I chose to stay home instead of going to brunch, I was isolating myself. Madison never raised her voice. She did not need to. She used concern the way some people use a key, slipping it into every lock until doors opened for her. The worst part was how easily Daniel followed. He began calling in the evenings with questions that did not sound like his. "Did you take your blood pressure pill? Did you lock the back door? Are you sure you paid the electric bill?" I had paid bills before he knew how to spell his own name. I had stretched grocery money during layoffs, handled insurance forms after Harold's surgery, negotiated with contractors after a pipe burst in January. I had kept that family standing through storms that Daniel had been too young to remember. But now he spoke to me as if I might leave the oven on and wander into the street. One afternoon I tested Madison. I placed a white thread across the top drawer of Harold's filing cabinet, so thin it nearly disappeared against the wood. Then I left for the grocery store, bought milk, bread, apples, and a rotisserie chicken from Kroger, and returned exactly 47 minutes later. The thread was on the floor. The drawer was closed. My breath did not catch. My hands did not shake. I simply picked up the thread, taped it inside my blue notebook, and wrote, "Someone opened the drawer while I was gone." That evening Madison called. Her voice was sweet enough to make my teeth ache. "Mom, I hope you do not mind, but Daniel and I were talking. It might be smart to put some of your papers in one place, just in case of an emergency." I sat at the kitchen table and looked across at Harold's empty chair. "What kind of papers?" I asked. A tiny pause. "Not long. Just long enough. You know, the house, the bank, anything Daniel might need if something happened." Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the block, ordinary and loud. I watched a sparrow hop along the porch railing Harold had painted every spring. "Nothing is going to happen," I said. Madison sighed softly, like a patient woman dealing with a stubborn child. "That is what everyone says until it does." After we hung up, I stayed at the table until the room grew dark. I was not thinking about the deed yet. Not fully. I was thinking about the way Madison had looked at my staircase, my cabinets, my husband's office. Not like family. Like a woman checking the locks on a house she already believed should be hers. The call with Madison ended, but her voice stayed in my kitchen like the smell of smoke after a candle is blown out. I sat across from Harold's empty chair and looked at the place where his coffee mug used to sit every morning, the white one with the cracked blue rim. He had never cared that it was chipped. He said a good thing did not become useless just because time had touched it. That sentence came back to me more often after he died, especially when Madison spoke to me like I was becoming a burden with silver hair and a paid-off mortgage. I got up slowly and walked through the house, turning on lamps as I went, not because I needed the light, but because I needed to remind myself that every room still knew me. The living room knew the Christmas mornings when Daniel ran down the stairs in flannel pajamas. The hallway knew the pencil marks Harold made on the doorframe, measuring our son as he grew from a boy with skinned knees into a man who forgot how much of himself had been built inside these walls. The kitchen knew the winters when money was tight and I stretched one roast into 3 dinners without letting anyone feel poor. And Harold's office knew the night he came home from the hospital with tired eyes and a folder tucked under his arm. That memory rose so clearly I could almost hear the rain against the windows. It had been 4 years before he passed, long before Madison began calling me Mom with that smooth little smile. Harold had been recovering from a heart procedure, moving slower than usual but still stubborn enough to refuse the cane the doctor suggested. I was folding laundry at the foot of our bed when he came in and sat beside me, holding a manila folder against his chest. "Eleanor," he said, "I need you to listen without arguing." I remember laughing because that was how he always began conversations he knew I would not like. "That sounds promising," I told him. He did not laugh back. He placed the folder on the quilt between us and rested his hand on top of it. His wedding band looked loose on his finger. "That frightened me more than anything," he said. "The house is yours," he told me. "Not Daniel's. Not anyone else's. Yours." I told him not to talk that way, because wives who have loved one man for more than 3 decades become very skilled at pretending certain endings are far away. But Harold kept going. He said he had seen too many widows pushed gently at first, then firmly, then legally, until one day they were sitting in a room someone else chose for them, wondering when their own lives stopped belonging to them. "Daniel is a good boy," he said, and then he paused in a way that made my fingers tighten around the towel I was folding. "But good people can still be led, especially by someone who speaks louder than their conscience." At the time I thought he was being overly cautious. Madison and Daniel had only been married for 2 years then, and she was still careful around us, still bringing pies on Thanksgiving and asking for my pot roast recipe as if she wanted to belong. I had not yet learned that some people study warmth so they can imitate it. Harold opened the folder and showed me documents I did not fully understand then. The deed, the trust, the durable power of attorney that named a longtime attorney instead of Daniel unless I personally changed it, and instructions that important originals were to be stored outside the house. I remember feeling hurt for Daniel's sake. "He is our son," I said. Harold nodded. "And you are my wife." There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. He took my hand and held it between both of his skin warm and dry. "Promise me you will not sign anything quickly. Not for convenience. Not for pressure. Not because someone says it will make life easier." I promised him because he needed to hear it, not because I believed the day would ever come when that promise mattered. Now, standing in the hallway years later, I understood that Harold had not been suspicious. He had been protective. The kind of protective that does not shout or make a scene. The kind that builds a fence before the wolves learn the path. I went upstairs to our bedroom, the one place in the house where grief still felt private, and opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. The smell of old wood and lavender sachets rose up, soft and familiar. Inside were birthday cards, Daniel's kindergarten drawings, Harold's military discharge papers, and the blue scarf he bought me in Asheville because he said it matched my eyes. I moved each item carefully. Not one document about the house was there. Madison had been looking in the wrong places because she did not understand us. She thought people like Harold and me kept value where it could be grabbed. We kept value where it could be protected. As I closed the chest, I noticed the digital clock on my dresser again. The numbers glowed green in the dim room. 9:18. The tiny black dot behind the face stared toward my closet like an unblinking eye. My stomach turned, but I made myself step closer. I lifted the clock with a tissue and set it on the bed. Then I checked the bookshelf, the air vent, the lamp beside the reading chair, moving slowly, refusing to let panic make me careless. I found the second one behind the framed photo of Daniel's college graduation, angled toward the cedar chest. That was the moment something in me settled. Not broke. Settled. Madison had not made one impulsive mistake. She had made a plan. I placed both devices on a towel, side by side, and looked at Harold's photograph on the dresser. His smile was small, almost knowing. "All right," I whispered. "We will do this your way." Then I took out my blue notebook, wrote down the time, the location of each device, and the exact words Madison had used on the phone. I did not call Daniel. I did not warn Madison. I did not give either of them the chance to call me confused before I was ready. I simply turned off the bedroom light, walked downstairs, and began preparing the house to tell the truth for me. I began with the attorney Harold had trusted for nearly 20 years. His name was Patrick Callahan, though Harold always called him Pat, as if a man who handled wills, deeds, and family disasters should still be allowed a plain name at the kitchen table. His office was in a brick building downtown, between a dentist and a small insurance agency, with an American flag by the door and a bowl of peppermints on the reception desk. I had not been there since the week after Harold's funeral, when I signed forms with hands that felt borrowed from someone older than me. That morning I drove myself. It was 9 miles. From my house, past the Kroger, the Methodist church, and the elementary school where Daniel once made a clay pumpkin for Thanksgiving. I remember that because I passed those places like they were witnesses. Each one had seen me as a mother, a wife, a neighbor, a woman who paid her property taxes on time and brought casseroles when people were sick. None of them saw me as helpless. Only my family had begun to practice that insult. Mr. Callahan looked up when I entered his office and stood immediately. He was older now, with white hair at the temples and reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck, but his eyes were sharp in the same quiet way Harold's had been. "Eleanor," he said, and one word was enough to make my throat tighten. Not because he sounded sorry for me, because he sounded respectful. I placed my purse on the chair across from his desk, opened it, and took out the folded towel holding the 2 devices. I set them down carefully on the polished wood between us. For a moment neither of us spoke. He did not touch them right away. He only looked. Then his mouth hardened. "Where did you find these?" "One in my bedroom clock," I said. "One behind Daniel's graduation photo. Both facing places where I keep personal belongings." His face changed at my son's name, not with surprise, but with the heaviness of a man who had spent too many years watching inheritance turn polite people into strangers. "Does Daniel know?" he asked. I shook my head. "If I tell him now, Madison will have him explaining it back to me before dinner." Mr. Callahan leaned back slowly. "That sounds like something Harold worried about." I looked down at my hands. My wedding ring was loose now, twisting slightly when I moved my fingers. "He knew, did he not?" Mr. Callahan folded his hands on the desk. "He knew enough to prepare." Then he opened a file cabinet behind him and pulled out a folder marked Whitaker, Harold and Eleanor. The sight of our names together on that label hurt more than I expected. A life reduced to a tab, a folder, a set of protections one spouse leaves behind because love knows it cannot stay in the room forever. Mr. Callahan explained everything with the patience of someone who understood that legal language can feel like a locked gate. The deed to the house had been transferred fully and cleanly into my name years earlier. The original was not in my home. It was held in secure storage, with certified copies available only through his office and the county recorder. Harold had also placed certain assets in a trust that named me as the protected beneficiary for the rest of my life. Daniel would inherit later, but not if he or anyone acting with him tried to pressure me, misrepresent my mental state, isolate me, or obtain my signature through manipulation. Harold insisted on that wording, Mr. Callahan said. He was very specific. I closed my eyes for a second and saw my husband at our kitchen table, filling out crossword puzzles in ink because he said pencil was for people who planned to be wrong. He had been planning to protect me while I was still pretending I did not need protecting. What happens if Madison is trying to get me to sign something? I asked. Mr. Callahan's expression grew careful. Then we do not guess. We document. You do not accuse her without proof, and you do not sign anything she brings you. Not a medical release, not a household form, not a so-called convenience authorization. Nothing. I took out the blue notebook and slid it across the desk. He read the entries one by one slowly. The shifted drawer. The questions about documents. The remarks about my memory. The thread on the floor. The calls from Daniel that sounded like Madison had written them first. When he finished, he looked at me over his glasses. Eleanor, this is not simple concern. This is a pattern. Strange how a formal word can make pain feel less lonely. Pattern. Not imagination. Not sensitivity. Not an old woman reading shadows into ordinary rooms. A pattern. Mr. Callahan asked if I felt safe at home. I told him yes because I did. Madison did not frighten me in the way she wanted to. What frightened me was how easily she wore kindness while reaching for control. He advised me to change the locks, but I asked him to wait. Not because I was foolish. Because Madison had not yet shown Daniel who she was, and I knew my son would need more than my word. That admission cost me more than any legal fee could have. A mother should not need evidence to be believed by her child. But I had already learned what Madison had done to his trust. She had not stolen it in one night. She had thinned it slowly, like watering down soup until no one remembered how rich it used to be. Mr. Callahan made copies of my notebook pages and photographed the devices without turning them on. Then he placed everything in an evidence envelope and gave me a look that reminded me again of Harold. If she thinks the deed is in your house, let her keep thinking that. But do not handle this alone. I nodded. I was not planning to. Before I left, he handed me a plain brown envelope. It was empty. Sometimes, he said, people reveal themselves when they believe they have found exactly what they came for. I held that envelope on the drive home, resting it on the passenger seat where Harold used to place his hand over mine at red lights. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the maple tree in the front yard was dropping gold leaves across the lawn. Madison's car was not there. Daniel's was not there. The house stood quiet and white in the October sun. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel watched when I unlocked the door. I felt ready. I walked straight into Harold's office, opened the top drawer, and wrote 2 words across the envelope in my careful handwriting. House deed. The envelope looked harmless on Harold's desk, almost ordinary, and that was why it worked. Madison would never have reached for something dramatic. She was too careful for that. She liked quiet opportunities, unlocked drawers, soft explanations, little moments that could be denied if someone walked in too soon. So I gave her something quiet. A plain brown envelope, the kind any widow might use for important papers, labeled in my own handwriting and placed just deep enough inside the top drawer to look hidden without being difficult to find. Inside, I put a single sheet of paper Mr. Callahan had printed for me before I left his office. It was not legal language. It was not a threat. It was one sentence centered in the middle of the page. This is not the deed. This is proof that you came looking for it. I read it twice before sliding it into the envelope. The words felt plain and cold, exactly the way truth should feel when it has been waiting patiently. After that, I moved through the house with the same care Harold used when setting up Christmas lights along the porch rail. Every choice had to look natural. The office lamp stayed on because I had been using it in the evenings since Harold died. The top drawer was left closed but not locked, because Madison knew I rarely locked doors inside my own home. The hallway light stayed off because from the front windows it would make the house look asleep. I placed my blue notebook in the kitchen drawer beneath the dish towels, not because it needed hiding from Madison, but because some things deserve to remain untouched until they are ready to speak. Then I made the phone call that would turn suspicion into proof. Mr. Callahan answered on the second ring. Everything is in place, he asked. The envelope is in Harold's desk, I said. And the real documents? Still with you. Good. Remember, Eleanor, you are not confronting her to win an argument. You are allowing her to reveal intent. Intent. Another legal word, but I understood it perfectly. People can apologize for mistakes. They can explain confusion. They can cry over misunderstandings. But intent has footsteps. Intent unlocks a door after dark. Intent walks past the family photographs and goes straight to the drawer. At 7 that evening, I did something I had not done in weeks. I cooked a real dinner. Not for appetite, but for the shape of normal life. Pot roast, carrots, red potatoes, and green beans with almonds because Daniel had loved them as a boy. The smell filled the house and softened the edges of everything, which almost made me angry. Some aromas are too kind. They make a home feel safe even when someone has already poisoned the air with lies. Daniel and Madison arrived at 6:32. I noticed the time because I had started noticing everything. Daniel carried a grocery store pie in a plastic dome, still wearing his work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Madison came behind him in a camel-colored coat, smiling as if she had never placed a hidden device in my bedroom, as if the woman she was hugging had no right to know when she was being watched. "Mom," she said warmly, holding me for 1 second too long. "You look rested." There it was again. The inspection hidden inside affection. I stepped back and smiled. I slept well. Her eyes moved past me, down the hallway toward Harold's office. Not long. Not enough for Daniel to notice. Enough for me. During dinner, Madison performed concern with the grace of a woman who had rehearsed it in front of mirrors. She praised the roast. She asked about my blood pressure. She reminded Daniel that they should check my smoke detector batteries before winter. Daniel looked relieved by her kindness, and I felt the old ache rise beneath my ribs. He wanted peace so badly that he kept mistaking performance for love. Halfway through the meal, I set my fork down and said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, "I need to organize Harold's office tomorrow. I keep worrying I misplaced the house papers." Madison did not move, but her hand tightened around her water glass. Daniel looked up. "Do you need help with that?" Before I could answer, Madison touched his arm. "Let her do it at her own pace. Too much help can feel overwhelming." I almost admired the speed of it. She wanted me alone with the idea. She wanted Daniel away from the drawer. I lowered my eyes to my plate and said, "Maybe you are right." After dessert, Daniel offered to take out the trash. Madison volunteered to rinse dishes. She stood at my sink with her back to me, humming softly while the water ran, but I could see her reflection in the dark kitchen window. Her eyes kept moving toward the hallway. At 8:15 they left. Daniel kissed my cheek and told me to call if I needed anything. Madison squeezed my shoulder and said, "Do not stay up too late worrying about papers." I watched their car pull away, its red taillights shrinking down the street. Then I turned off the porch light, walked upstairs, and made the house believe I had gone to bed. At 10:30 I changed into my robe and slippers. At 11 I turned off the bedroom lamp. At 11:20 I took my phone, stepped silently into the hallway, and stood where the shadows gathered beside the staircase. The house settled around me with its familiar nighttime sounds. The furnace clicking, the old boards breathing, a branch brushing lightly against the upstairs window. At 11:41, headlights swept across the living room wall. At 11:43, the front door opened with the spare key. Madison did not call my name. She did not check on me. She did not hesitate. She closed the door behind her, walked straight into Harold's office, and reached for the drawer. For several seconds, Madison did nothing but stare at the paper. Her back was to me, but I could read the change in her body more clearly than any confession. The confidence went out of her shoulders first. Then her head tilted slightly, the way people tilt their heads when the words in front of them refuse to become the truth they expected. Her fingers tightened around the page until it bent at the corners. The lamp on Harold's desk lit the side of her face, and I saw the color drain from it in slow degrees. I stayed in the hallway with my phone raised, recording every movement. The front door behind her was unlocked now. The spare key was still in her coat pocket. The drawer was open. The envelope was in her hand. The paper had done what I needed it to do. It had let Madison meet herself without my voice getting in the way. She turned toward the office doorway suddenly, as if she had felt me there, but I had already stepped back into the shadow beside the built-in bookcase. She listened. The house listened with her. The furnace clicked once. Somewhere upstairs, an old floorboard gave its usual winter creak. Madison swallowed and looked toward the staircase, probably picturing me asleep in the room she had watched through that little black dot. That thought moved through me like ice water, but I did not let it show. I had learned something that night. Anger is loud, but dignity is quieter and lasts longer. Madison folded the paper quickly and pushed it back into the envelope, but her hands were no longer steady. She opened the next folder, then the next. Moving faster now, abandoning the carefulness that had protected her before. Insurance, taxes, medical records, utility statements. She was not looking out of concern. She was hunting. I let her search for almost 4 minutes. Long enough for the video to show purpose. Long enough for no one to call it an accident. Then I stepped into the doorway and turned on the overhead light. Madison spun around so fast the envelope slipped from her hand and landed on Harold's rug. Her mouth opened, and for one small moment, I saw the woman behind all the polish. Not strong. Not clever. Just caught. "Were you searching for something, Madison?" I asked. My voice surprised even me. It did not shake. It did not rise. It sounded like the voice I used when Daniel was a teenager and came home late. The voice that said I already knew enough, and was waiting to see whether honesty would arrive on its own. Madison pressed one hand to her chest. "Eleanor, you scared me half to death. You came into my house after 11:40 at night. I was worried. You used the spare key. Daniel gave it to me for emergencies." I looked at the open drawer, then at the envelope on the floor. What was the emergency? She followed my gaze and moved one step sideways, as if her body could block the evidence after the evidence had already spoken. "You said at dinner you were worried about the house papers." I could not sleep. I thought if I found them, I could help you organize everything before you got upset tomorrow. There it was, polished again, almost beautiful in its shape. She had crawled into my husband's office at midnight and still managed to dress it as kindness. I walked to the rug and picked up the envelope. I did not bend quickly. At my age, even victory has to respect the knees. When I stood again, Madison's eyes were fixed on my phone. "Are you recording me?" she asked. "Yes." Her face hardened, then softened, then searched for tears and found none. "That is a terrible thing to do to family." I looked at her for a long moment. So is placing cameras in a widow's bedroom. The silence after that sentence was different from every silence before it. It was not empty. It was full. Madison blinked. "I do not know what you mean." I reached into the pocket of my robe and took out the small digital clock from my dresser, wrapped in a clean dish towel. I had removed the power cord earlier and carried it with me like a strange little witness. I set it on Harold's desk. Then I placed the second device beside it, the one from behind Daniel's graduation photograph. Madison stared at them, and for once she did not reach for either one. "You put one facing my closet," I said, "and one facing the cedar chest at the foot of my bed." "No," she whispered. "Those are not mine." "Then you will not mind explaining them to Daniel." That was when she changed. Not visibly enough for a stranger to notice, but I noticed. Her fear was no longer about me. It was about my son. "Eleanor," she said, lowering her voice, "let us not upset Daniel before we understand what happened." "We understand what happened." "No, you are confused. You have been under stress. Harold's passing, the house, all the responsibility. You found something and built a story around it." I almost pitied how quickly she returned to that same old road. Confusion. Stress. Too much responsibility. She had used those words so often they had become the wallpaper of her plan. I unlocked my phone and pressed Daniel's name. Madison stepped forward. "Please do not." I looked at her hand raised slightly between us, then at her face. "Do not worry," I said. "I am only doing what you always told him you wanted. I am asking for help." Daniel answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep and concern. "Mom? Are you okay?" I kept my eyes on Madison as I spoke. "I need you to come to the house, Daniel. Your wife is here in Harold's office, and she has been looking through my private files." There was silence on the line, then the sound of movement, sheets rustling, a light switch clicking. "Madison is where?" "In my office," I said, "with the spare key." "At midnight." Madison closed her eyes. Not in shame, in calculation. Even then, I could see her preparing the next version of the truth. I ended the call before she could speak to him and placed the phone on the desk, still recording. Then I sat in Harold's chair for the first time since his funeral. The leather was cool beneath my hands. Madison stood across from me, pale under the office light, the open drawer behind her like a mouth that had finally said too much. I did not fill the silence for her. I let her stand inside it. Daniel arrived 12 minutes later with his coat half buttoned and his hair still flattened on one side from sleep. I heard his truck before I saw the headlights sweep across the office wall. Bright for a second, then gone. Madison turned toward the window, and for the first time that night, she looked less like a woman caught in someone else's house and more like a wife preparing to reclaim her audience. She smoothed her sweater. She touched her hair. She even glanced at the two devices on Harold's desk as if deciding which version of them would sound most believable. I stayed in Harold's chair with my hands folded in my lap. That chair had always seemed too large after he died, but in that moment it fit me better than my own fear ever had. Daniel came through the front door calling, "Mom!" His voice carried the panic of a son, but also the confusion of a man who had already been told what to think too many times. He stepped into the office and stopped. His eyes moved from me to Madison to the open drawer to the envelope on the rug, then to the small devices on the desk. "What is going on?" he asked. Madison reached him first with her voice. "Daniel, thank God you are here. Your mother is upset. She found some kind of old electronics and thinks I had something to do with them." I watched my son's face shift toward her automatically, like a plant turning toward the window. It hurt. Even prepared, it hurt. "Mom," he said softly. That softness almost undid me because it carried doubt inside it. Not cruelty. Doubt. The kind Madison had watered for weeks. I did not answer right away. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and placed it on the desk beside the digital clock. "Sit down, Daniel." He looked at Madison, then at me, and finally sat in the wooden chair by the bookcase. Madison remained standing. She preferred standing. Let her look helpful. Alert above the mess. I began with the simplest thing. "Your wife entered my house tonight using the spare key. She did not call first. She did not knock. She did not check on me. She walked directly into this office and opened that drawer." Madison shook her head quickly. "Because you said you were worried about the papers." "At dinner," I said. "I said I might organize them tomorrow." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Madison, why would you come over at midnight?" "Because I was worried she would stay up all night stressing herself sick," Madison said, turning toward him. "You know how she has been lately." "Lately?" Another little cage. I opened my blue notebook and slid it across the desk to Daniel. "Read the dates." He hesitated, then picked it up. I watched his eyes move down the pages. Drawer shifted. Questions about the house papers. Comments about memory. Thread broken. Calls about medicine and bills. Each line was small by itself, almost embarrassingly small. Together, they became a staircase leading to this room. Madison tried to interrupt twice, but I lifted my hand without looking at her. "You have spoken enough tonight." Daniel looked up at me then, startled. I do not think he had ever heard that tone from me directed at his wife. I almost had not heard it from myself. I pointed to the towel on the desk. "Those were found in my bedroom. One inside the clock Madison gave me. One behind your graduation photograph." Daniel's face went pale in a way that reminded me painfully of him at 12 years old, standing in the principal's office after breaking a window with a baseball, knowing the truth was worse than the accident. "Madison," he whispered. She let out a small laugh, thin and wounded. "You cannot seriously believe this. Daniel, your mother is grieving. She is scared. She is turning ordinary things into accusations." I expected that. So did Mr. Callahan. I tapped my phone screen and opened the photographs I had taken that evening before leaving for the attorney's office. One showed the clock opened carefully, the hidden lens visible behind the plastic face. Another showed the device behind the photograph, angled toward the cedar chest. The third showed the serial number on the back of the clock. I slid the phone to Daniel. "Mr. Callahan has copies." Madison's eyes snapped to mine. There it was. Not grief. Not concern. Fear of someone outside the family circle. Someone she could not sweet-talk over pot roast. "You went to a lawyer?" Daniel asked. His voice was small. "Harold's lawyer," I said. "The man your father trusted to protect what he built." Then I pressed the call button. Mr. Callahan answered by video within seconds as arranged. His face appeared on the screen under the bright office light, tie loosened, glasses low on his nose. Daniel stared at him as if the night had become too real to escape. "Daniel," Mr. Callahan said, "your mother came to see me this morning. The original deed is not in that house. It has not been there for years. Your father made sure of that." Madison stepped closer. "This is inappropriate." Mr. Callahan did not look at her. "What is inappropriate is entering Mrs. Whitaker's home without permission and searching private files. What is also serious is any attempt to portray her as incapable in order to influence property decisions." Daniel looked at Madison then. Not quickly. Slowly. Like a man turning toward a sound he had been pretending not to hear. "Property decisions," he repeated. I took the envelope from the desk and handed it to him. He read the page inside. "This is not the deed. This is proof that you came looking for it." His hand lowered. The room seemed to shrink around the three of us. Madison began crying then, but the tears came late, after the evidence, after the attorney, after the paper she had opened with her own hands. "I was trying to help," she said. "Your mother is alone in this big house. She forgets things. She needs us." I stood then, slowly enough for my knees, firmly enough for my dignity. "No, Madison. You needed me to look forgetful. You needed Daniel to worry. You needed a reason to handle papers that never belonged to you." Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, but I was too tired to be rescued by his guilt. He turned to his wife and said, "Did you put those cameras there?" Madison looked at him, then at me, then at the phone, where Mr. Callahan waited in silence. Her mouth trembled around another denial, but no words came. That was her answer. Daniel sat back as if the chair had disappeared beneath him. I watched my son finally see the room he was standing in. His father's desk, his mother's notebook, his wife beside an open drawer. A whole family rearranged by one woman's appetite and one man's refusal to question it. I did not comfort him. Not yet. Some realizations need to land without a mother softening the floor. Madison left the house before dawn with Daniel walking behind her like a man who had aged 10 years in one night. She did not apologize to me. People like Madison rarely apologize when the truth first catches up with them. They rearrange their face, gather what little dignity they can still borrow, and leave as if the room itself has offended them. Daniel paused at the front door and looked back at me. His eyes were red, his mouth unsteady. "Mom," he said, but the word had too much weight for the hour. I lifted one hand. "Not now, Daniel." He nodded, and that small nod told me he understood something important. A son does not get to sleep through his mother's humiliation and wake up expecting forgiveness with the sunrise. When the door closed behind them, the house became quiet in a way it had not been quiet for weeks. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. Empty is what Harold left behind when the hospital called, and my world narrowed to one chair beside one bed. Quiet is what returns after a liar stops speaking. I stood in the foyer until the first pale light touched the glass panels beside the door. Then I did the things a woman does when she is taking her life back in practical pieces. I removed the spare key from beneath the porch planter. I took the little ceramic dish of extra keys from the hallway table and placed it in my purse. I unplugged the digital clock and the hallway lamp Madison had once admired too long. I made coffee. I drank it from Harold's chipped mug because some mornings require the courage of old habits. At 8:30, I called a locksmith in town, a man named Russell whose sticker had been on our back door since Harold replaced the deadbolt 15 years earlier. By noon, every exterior lock had been changed. The garage code was reset. The spare key Daniel had given Madison no longer opened anything but his own shame. Mr. Callahan sent a formal letter that afternoon. It was not emotional. Legal letters never need to be. They are cold because they are meant to be. Madison was informed that she was not permitted inside my home, not permitted to access my records, not permitted to contact service providers or financial institutions on my behalf, and not permitted to represent herself as someone authorized to manage my affairs. The evidence was preserved. The trust protections were activated. If anyone attempted to pressure me into signing documents, questioning my competence without medical basis, or transferring property, Harold's instructions would take effect. I read the letter twice at the kitchen table, not because I needed to understand it, but because I wanted to feel the shape of protection in plain English. Later that evening, Daniel came alone. He did not use a key. He knocked. That mattered more than he knew. I let him stand on the porch for a few seconds before opening the door, long enough for both of us to remember that entry was no longer automatic. He looked smaller in the porch light, shoulders bent, hands in the pockets of his jacket. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, but I did not move toward him. In the living room, he sat on the edge of the sofa where Harold used to nap during football games. He looked at the framed photographs on the mantel, at the picture of himself missing his 2 front teeth, at the family beach trip in North Carolina, at Harold holding a stringer of fish he had been too proud of for their size. "I should have believed you," Daniel said finally. I sat in the armchair across from him. "You should have noticed before belief was required." He flinched and I let him. Some truths should not be wrapped in cotton. He told me Madison had said she only wanted to protect him from future stress, that she feared the house would become a burden, that she had convinced herself she was helping the family prepare. He said the words carefully, but even he did not seem to believe them anymore. "I do not know what happens next with my marriage," he said. "That is yours to decide," I told him. "But what happens next in this house is mine." He nodded. Tears gathered in his eyes, and the mother in me wanted to cross the room, touch his cheek, and tell him everything could still be easy. But the woman Harold protected stayed seated. "Love does not require me to unlock the door for the person who helped someone else doubt my mind." "I am sorry," Daniel whispered. "I know," I said. "But I am not ready to make your apology useful to you." He lowered his head then, and for the first time in months, no one translated my pain into inconvenience. No one called me confused. No one told me I was too old, too emotional, too alone, or too attached to a house I had earned one mortgage payment at a time. After Daniel left, I walked upstairs to my bedroom. The dresser looked bare without the clock, so I placed Harold's photograph in the center where the green numbers used to glow. I opened the cedar chest and touched the blue scarf, Daniel's drawings, the letters tied with ribbon. Nothing had been stolen from there. Not really. Madison had reached for papers because she thought the house was the prize. She never understood that the true inheritance in that home was not wood, brick, or a recorded deed at the county office. It was the right to remain myself inside the life I had built. The next morning, I opened the bedroom window and let the October air in. Gold leaves moved across the lawn in little circles. Somewhere down the street, a school bus sighed at the curb. The house smelled like coffee, old wood, and rain coming later. I stood there in my robe, 68 years old, widowed, watched, doubted, and still standing. She came looking for my deed, but she forgot something Harold never did. The house was mine. My name was mine. And my dignity had never been hers to take.